Ma'am, you're holding up the entire line. I'm moving as fast as I can, sir. Well, try harder. Coach is crowded enough without this. The man's voice snapped through the cramped jet bridge like a cold blade. A low hum from the aircraft's AC system leaked into the tunnel, mixing with the shuffle of impatient passengers. Evelyn Harper steadied her hand on the rail, her fingers brushing the small silver wing pin she wore on her blouse. Plain, unremarkable, easy to overlook. But the man behind her, a broad-shouldered traveler named Dennis Cole, saw only one thing: an older woman in a simple cardigan, trying to maneuver her carry-on down a narrowing path. He leaned forward again, toned sharper. You know, they let people pre-board for a reason. If you can't handle Coach, you should have done that. Evelyn didn't turn. She simply inhaled, calm but firm. Sir, please step back. There's room. Her voice was gentle. Too gentle, Dennis thought. He rolled his eyes, then made a loud show of checking his watch. Ahead, the cabin lights pulsed softly as attendants ushered people to their rows aboard Flight 2873, preparing for the morning departure from Dallas-Fort Worth. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paper boarding passes. Behind Dennis, other passengers shifted, sensing tension. A woman whispered, "Is he serious?" Another murmured, "Just let her through." But no one stepped in. Dennis huffed. Unbelievable. First you slow us down, then you tell me what to do. Evelyn swallowed once, keeping her eyes forward. The aisle inside the aircraft was just a few steps away. Only a few more feet and she could rest. She was 62, not frail, but the early flight and long walk through security had taken a toll. Then Dennis exhaled dramatically and nudged her bag with his foot, just enough to jolt it forward. Evelyn stopped. So did the line. A flight attendant named Grace Miller, stationed at the cabin entrance, turned sharply at the sound. She saw Evelyn frozen mid-step, Dennis looming behind her, and the stalled queue. Her training kicked in. "Sir, please don't touch another passenger's belongings," Grace said. Her tone was steady, authoritative, but polite. Dennis raised his brows. "I barely tapped it. Can we keep it moving? Some of us have connections to make." Evelyn spoke quietly. "I'm just trying to get to my seat." Grace stepped closer. "Ma'am, may I assist you with your bag?" Dennis scoffed. "Figures. She slows us down and gets special treatment." A few heads turned. A man in row 12 muttered, "Come on, buddy," but didn't finish. Grace's expression tightened. "Sir, please lower your voice." Dennis wasn't ready to let it go. "Why don't you tell her to move faster? Coach passengers like her always." He stopped when Evelyn finally turned and met his eyes. Not angry, not flustered, just composed, as if she'd weathered worse storms. In that moment, the overhead lights flickered as ground crew completed final checks, casting a brief sheen over Evelyn's silver wing pin. Grace noticed the pin and paused, not with recognition, but with curiosity, as though the small emblem meant something more. Evelyn shifted her bag herself and stepped toward the cabin. The AC hum grew louder, blending with a murmur of passengers settling into their seats. Dennis muttered one last time, "This is why I hate flying coach." Right then, a voice crackled over Grace's radio. "Grace, we need a moment before door close." The corporate team flagged a note for this flight. Grace glanced at Evelyn, then at Dennis. A soft unease rippled through the front rows. Something about the tone. Something about the timing. Evelyn's eyes lowered briefly to her wing pin, just one quiet breath of hesitation, before she continued down the aisle toward seat 22C. Grace watched her go, a suspicion forming but unspoken. And Dennis, still irritated, had no idea that the woman he just pushed past was connected to the flight in a way that would append everything before they ever left the runway. Enjoying this? Tap subscribe for tomorrow's story. Evelyn Harper moved through the cabin with the quiet certainty of someone who had lived a long, deliberate life. People noticed, not because she asked to be seen, but because she carried herself like a person who had learned how to remain steady while storms passed. Her cardigan fell in soft folds. Her silver wing pin caught the light when she reached for the overhead bin. The pin was small, polished, and ordinary to anyone who did not look closely. She settled into seat 22C, set her bag beneath the seat in front of her, and allowed a short, private exhale. The AC hummed steadily overhead. The flight attendants made routine checks. Around her, the cabin murmured with the soft sounds of zippers, paper, and the practiced shuffle of travel. Dennis Cole in the aisle glanced back once, then forward, his impatience reasserting itself. He had a businesslike gait and a briefcase that smelled faintly of leather and citrus breath mints. He tapped his phone and scrolled. He was not going to miss a meeting for anything. Evelyn watched him out of the corner of her eye, then let that look go. She did not want to be part of anyone's spectacle. She wanted, simply, to fly. She thought of the morning's slow parking lot, the bus from the remote lot into the airport that had jostled her with its sudden stops. She thought of the TSA checkpoint and a polite agent who asked if she needed assistance. She remembered the small kindness of coffee in a paper cup handed to her by a barista who smiled even though the line had been long. Those ordinary moments collected into a soft armor against the sharp edges of a stranger's cruelty. Across the aisle, Grace Miller secured the cabin with practiced hands. Grace was 31, wearing her hair in a neat bun, and carried the kind of professionalism that came from years of early morning flights. She had watched the exchange with Dennis and Evelyn and filed it away as one of those moments. She had been a flight attendant for a decade and had learned that people arrived at a plane stacked with their own burdens: late connections, grief, phone calls, sleepless nights. Mostly, they needed the quiet space to be human. She glanced at the radio clipped to her waistband and then at the bulkhead curtain, noting the order they needed to keep. Evelyn's neighbor in 22B, a young father named Marcus Reed, buckled his toddler's harness with gentle care. The child hummed a tune about trains, calm as a locket. Marcus offered Evelyn a small, apologetic smile for the brief delay earlier. "Sorry about that, fellow," he said in a low voice. "Some folks forget other people are human." Evelyn returned the smile. "I'm all right, dear." Her voice was soft but steady, like the tone of someone who had taught classrooms, sat through long meetings, mentored younger colleagues, and lost sleep over decisions that mattered. She had the look of a woman who had been entrusted with responsibilities and had carried them without fuss. Before boarding, she had placed a small, folded paper in her bag, a note written in a careful script. It was neither dramatic nor conspicuous, a series of numbers, a reference code, and a name. It was her habit to keep records. She believed in paper and memory both, in leaving trails of evidence so that facts could speak when emotions clouded the room. The note sat under her wallet now, unseen to everyone but her. The captain's door clicked, and a polite voice announced, "Welcome aboard Flight 2873 to Chicago. We'll be with you in just a moment." Around Evelyn, the cabin settled into that peculiar hush that comes before departure. Overhead, lights dimmed fractionally. Someone in row 18 sneezed. A child laughed in row 5. The flight attendants exchanged quick, efficient looks and began final safety demonstrations. Dennis, however, could not let it go. He leaned into the aisle as if the line at security had carved him a permanent edge. "We need to get moving," he muttered, loud enough for the rows behind him to hear. "Because someone can't keep up." Grace, standing near the front, met his gaze. Her posture was professional but firm. "Sir, if you have a concern, please bring it to me, and I'll be glad to help." He huffed. "Fine. But just so you know, delays because of people like her." He trailed off when an older man in 21A, a retired schoolteacher named Harold, quietly cleared his throat and said, "We were all here on time." His voice carried the steady authority of someone who had lived by the rules and expected others to do the same. Dennis's jaw tightened, and for a beat the cabin felt as if it might tip into a louder confrontation. Evelyn reached out and touched the silver pin at her collar, the gesture almost unconscious, a small ritual that steadied her. The pin had been with her through decisions that had mattered: boardrooms and classrooms, flights taken in twilight and dawn. It was a personal token. Others might see it as merely decorative, but to Evelyn it signified a private agreement she kept with herself. Move forward with dignity and keep the records that matter. Grace's radio chirped again, the same soft urgency from the ground crew as before. She glanced down, then looked toward the cockpit door. "1 minute," she said lightly, but the way she said it carried the weight of someone who had heard a name on a list and wanted to understand why it was flagged. Nobody else on the plane knew what that flag might mean. Nobody yet suspected that a single routine flight would become the place where small injustices and hidden power would collide. Outside, through the narrow oval windows, Dallas morning spread in pale blue and gold. Inside, the cabin throbbed with small human anxieties: too tight seats, old magazines, the rustle of maps. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, counting breaths, then opened them to meet the day. A nearby passenger, past a whispered remark. "Something's up." Corporate called it in. No one understood the weight of that phrase. Not yet. Evelyn tucked her hand beneath her bag and felt the folded paper against her palm. She did not know what would happen next. She only knew she had stories worth defending. Grace Miller made one more sweep down the aisle, her shoes tapping lightly against the cabin floor. She checked seat belts, tray tables, and the overhead bins, but her mind kept circling back to the earlier radio call. Corporate didn't flag passengers casually. Usually it meant a medical accommodation, a last-minute upgrade, or on rare occasions, a compliance issue about someone's behavior. But none of that matched the quiet woman in 22C. Grace paused near row 20 and adjusted an oxygen mask panel that had shifted out of alignment. When she glanced toward Evelyn, she caught a quick glimpse of the silver-winged pin again. The cabin lights blinked gently against the metal, giving it a small halo. Something about that shimmer tugged at her memory, like a badge she had seen years ago in a framed photograph at training. Before she could place it, her radio crackled again. Grace, after pushback, remained near row 22. "We have a seating confirmation to resolve." Her brows lifted slightly. "Copy that," she whispered back, though she wasn't sure what it meant. Evelyn, unaware, smoothed a wrinkle in her cardigan. Marcus in 22B shifted his toddler to a more comfortable position. The child murmured, up high, gazing dreamily at the ceiling. Evelyn smiled softly. Dennis, meanwhile, was getting restless. He thumbed his phone with irritation until the screen flashed the familiar airplane mode icon. "Great," he muttered. "Now I get to sit in a middle seat behind someone who can't keep pace." A young college student across the aisle, Rachel Carter, looked up from her crossword puzzle. She eyed Dennis, uncertain whether to intervene. She didn't want a confrontation, but she also wasn't raised to let small cruelties pass without notice. Her knee bounced anxiously. Before anything escalated, the captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're awaiting a brief clearance from the gate. Thank you for your patience." A subtle ripple passed through the cabin. Sighs, rustles, an impatient shift of bodies. Evelyn sat still, her posture composed. She tapped the small folded paper inside her bag again, as if grounding herself. A note, a reference code, a name. Her ritual of preparedness. She had spent a lifetime making sure people were treated fairly. Students, younger coworkers, community members. Some days she succeeded. Some days she absorbed the unfairness silently, hoping it mattered later. Row 22 felt warm with recycled air. The hum of the AC deepened, becoming a low blanket of white noise. Evelyn inhaled, then exhaled slowly, letting her shoulders settle. 30 seconds later, a voice behind her startled the row. "Excuse me." Everyone turned. A ground supervisor named Linda Jacobs, wearing a crisp navy vest, stepped into the cabin. Her clipboard was tucked under one arm, her expression neutral but focused. Grace met her halfway. "Is this about the seating note?" Linda nodded. "Yes." "Passenger verification." Dennis groaned. "Oh, wonderful." More delays. Linda ignored him. She scanned the rows until her eyes landed on Evelyn. There was the smallest flicker of recognition, barely noticeable unless one was watching closely. "Ms. Harper?" Linda asked. Evelyn looked up calmly. "Yes, dear. We just need to confirm something quickly. Would you mind if I speak with you for a moment?" A murmur traveled through the nearby rows. Marcus shifted, protective without meaning to. Rachel leaned forward, sensing tension. Evelyn nodded and stood slowly, steadying herself on the armrest. "Of course." As she stepped into the aisle, Dennis muttered loudly, "Fantastic." Now we're all waiting on her again. A hush rippled outward. Even the toddlers stopped humming. Linda turned sharply. "Sir, that's enough." Her voice was steady, professional, but with an undertone of authority that caught several passengers off guard. Dennis stiffened. He wasn't expecting pushback. Evelyn glanced at him, not with anger, just a mild, regretful softness. Then she followed Linda toward the galley, where the front cabin lights glowed a little brighter. The silver-winged pin glinted again as she walked. Grace remained a few rows back, watching carefully. In the small galley, Linda lowered her voice. "Ma'am, I apologize for the disruption. This will be quick. We received a note from headquarters asking us to verify your comfort, well, to confirm that no one has caused you distress during boarding." Evelyn blinked, surprised. "Oh." That's thoughtful of them. Linda hesitated. It's not common procedure, so I wanted to check personally. Out in the cabin, people were whispering. What's going on? Why did they call her up? She seemed so calm. Dennis looked particularly unsettled, though he tried to hide it behind crossed arms. After a quiet exchange, Linda and Evelyn returned to row 22 together. Linda's posture had changed, more attentive, more deferential. She offered Evelyn a hand as she eased back into her seat. If you need anything, press the call button, and I'll come right away, Linda said. Marcus noticed the shift. He tilted his head, curious. Rachel watched too, a puzzle forming in her mind. But Dennis? His jaw tightened. Something about the supervisor's tone unnerved him. He cleared his throat loudly. Are we done now? Linda turned. Sir, if you continue speaking in a disrespectful manner, we'll have to address your behavior formally. That silenced him. As Linda left the cabin, Grace stepped close to Evelyn. Ma'am, if you need anything at all, I'm right here. Evelyn offered her a warm, appreciative smile. Thank you, Grace. Grace lingered, uncertain why she suddenly felt the need to take care of this one passenger more than usual. Her eyes drifted once more to the silver wing pin, quiet, polished, and somehow familiar. The cabin lights dimmed again, and the engines hummed faintly. Something was shifting. Quietly. Invisibly. And no one, especially Dennis, understood the direction it was heading. The cabin softened into a careful quiet, the kind that settles when people sense that something important has shifted but can't name how. The overhead vents hummed steadily, a familiar white noise. Evelyn rested her hands in her lap, the silver wing pin catching a single thread of light from the window. She could feel the change in the air, small, almost imperceptible, but real. Grace stood nearby, pretending to check on row 21 seatbelts, but really watching Evelyn. That wing pin tugged at her memory again. She had seen a pin like that in training, on a wall of framed photographs showing the original founders of the airline, each wearing a variation of the same emblem. But that seemed impossible. Decorative pins were sold in gift shops. Millions of passengers wore versions of them. Still, something about Evelyn made the thought linger longer than it should have. Dennis shifted noisily in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the attention he was no longer receiving. So now we can finally take off, he muttered. Unbelievable. Rachel, the college student, looked over at him. This time she didn't hide it. Sir, maybe just let things settle. Dennis shrugged. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. But no one nodded. No one agreed. The silence that followed wasn't supportive. It was isolating. Grace moved to the front to check with a captain. A minute later she returned, her face composed but thoughtful. We're cleared for pushback, she announced to the nearby rows. Evelyn exhaled softly. She had hoped the moment had passed. But as the plane eased back from the gate with a slow jolt, she sensed it hadn't. Something else was coming. 10:13 a.m., first and only timestamp allowed until later. Outside, service vehicles drifted by like quiet choreography. The runway shimmered in the Texas heat. Inside, the aircraft aligned itself for taxi. Marcus adjusted his toddler's blanket and leaned slightly toward Evelyn. Everything all right, ma'am? That looked like more than a routine check. Evelyn considered her words with care. Just a small verification, she said. Nothing to worry about. But Marcus noticed the undertone, not fear, but a calm bracing, as if she were expecting a second wave. He gave her a gentle nod. If you need help with anything, I'm close by. She appreciated that. Kindness mattered, even when it came from strangers passing briefly through your life. The plane jolted gently as it turned toward the runway. The cabin swayed with emotion, soft and rhythmic. Dennis grumbled something about wasted time, but the comment dissolved into the drone of the engines. Grace made her way back down the aisle. Her posture had changed in a subtle but unmistakable way. She was attentive to everyone, but watching one person. As she neared row 22, she paused. Ms. Harper, can I get you water before takeoff? Or tea? Evelyn blinked. Tea would be nice. But after takeoff, dear. Don't fuss. Grace nodded, still puzzled by her own instinct. Why did she feel protective? She didn't usually attach like this. But something about the interaction, something about the supervisor's sudden shift, told her that Evelyn Harper was not just another passenger. When Grace stepped away, Rachel leaned across the aisle slightly. Ms. Harper, not that it's our business, but are you sure you're okay? Evelyn offered her the smallest smile. Yes. Thank you. But why did the supervisor seem so? Rachel hesitated for the right word. Careful. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Her fingertips brushed the wing pin again, an old habit. It may become clear later, she said finally. Before Rachel could ask more, the engines roared to life with a deep vibration that filled the cabin. Conversations halted. The plane accelerated down the runway, wheels thundering beneath them. As they lifted into the air, the pressure in the cabin changed. The toddler laughed and clapped. Windows caught the bright Dallas sky in wide blue stripes. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then Grace's radio chirped, sharper this time. A voice spoke quietly. Grace, when you have a moment after reaching altitude, please pull up the special profile attached to passenger 22C. Grace froze for half a second. Special profile? Those were used for corporate executives, founders, board members, individuals with significant authority over the airline. Rarely seen. Almost never issued without direct instruction from the very top. Her eyes drifted instinctively to Evelyn. Rachel noticed Grace's reaction. So did Marcus. Even Dennis sensed the shift, though he tried to mask his unease. Probably just another delay, he grumbled, though his tone held less confidence now. Grace pressed the radio. Copy. I'll review it. When she looked again at Evelyn, the wing pin seemed brighter, like a memory resurfacing with purpose. Evelyn, meanwhile, sat quietly, watching the clouds drift past her window with a peacefulness that contrasted sharply with the tension growing around her. She knew the moment was coming. She had hoped it wouldn't be on this flight, not with strangers watching, not with the air already heavy with someone else's disrespect. But sometimes the truth arrived on its own schedule. The cabin leveled into smooth flight. Grace stepped toward row 22 once more. And Dennis Cole was about to discover just how small he had made himself in the presence of a woman whose influence reached far beyond seat 22C. The plane stabilized at cruising altitude, settling into that calm, suspended quiet that comes once engines ease into their steady rhythm. The cabin lights brightened slightly. A few passengers reclined, others unbuckled and stretched. The tension from boarding had thinned, but it hadn't vanished. It lingered, tucked into the spaces between rows, especially near 22C. Grace paused by the forward galley, steadying her breath before unlocking the digital crew tablet. She keyed in the flight code, then scrolled through the passenger manifest. Nothing unusual until she reached 22C. A gold banner appeared across the top of the screen. Priority, discretion. Executive-level courtesy required. Grace blinked. She tapped again. Another note unfolded beneath it, written in plain text. Passenger, Evelyn Harper. Verification completed. Note, founder's line, legacy clearance. Ensure comfort. Report any incident. Founder's line. Grace felt a faint tremor of recognition. That was the program created to honor the surviving family members and direct descendants of the airline's original founders, people who held historical, symbolic, and sometimes legal influence in the private board decisions. It wasn't publicly known. Most employees never interacted with anyone under that designation. A wave of clarity washed over her. The wing pin, the supervisor's shift in tone, the corporate flag. Evelyn Harper wasn't merely a passenger. She was connected, directly or by bloodline, to the people who had built the airline itself. Grace closed the tablet with a slow exhale. Her pulse quickened, not from fear but from understanding. If something had happened to a founder's line passenger, especially harassment, protocol required immediate documentation and follow-up. Quiet but firm. She turned toward the aisle. Evelyn sat calmly in 22C, watching the light flicker across the clouds. Marcus gently rocked his toddler, who had begun to drift into sleep. Rachel tapped her pen, pretending to work on her crossword but glancing frequently toward the front. Across the aisle, Dennis fidgeted. His earlier confidence had frayed. He could feel something shifting on a plane, and that shift no longer favored him. He glanced at Evelyn again, the memory of his sharp words creeping back. He cleared his throat, trying to anchor himself in irritation. All this fuss over nothing, he mumbled, though even he wasn't convinced. Grace approached slowly, her face composed but gentler than before. Ms. Harper, she said softly, may I speak with you a moment? Evelyn looked up, peaceful as ever. Of course. Grace crouched slightly, mindful of her posture. I've reviewed your profile. Her voice lowered. If anything happens on this flight that concerns you, anything at all, you may speak with me privately. You do not need to handle it alone. Evelyn's eyes shifted with a knowing softness. Thank you, Grace. I appreciate your professionalism. Grace nodded and stood. The nearby passengers pretended not to listen, but their attention sharpened. Dennis felt a chill. What profile? He demanded. Grace turned. Sir, that information is not for public discussion. He scoffed. I have a right to know if someone's causing delays. Marcus finally turned toward him. Sir, please stop. Dennis opened his mouth, then closed it when Grace's expression hardened with quiet authority. Mr. Cole, she said, voice measured, I need to speak with you briefly. Up front, the cabin shifted. Several passengers straightened, sensing a reckoning. Why? Dennis asked, his bravado thinning. It's about your conduct during boarding. Dennis gripped the armrests. I didn't do anything wrong. She was slow. That's all. Grace kept her tone level. The airline expects respectful conduct toward all passengers. There were witnesses to your remarks and actions. He flushed. You've got to be kidding me. Grace didn't waver. Sir? Now please. A silence draped over the cabin as Dennis rose and followed her, muttering under his breath. Rachel watched him go with quiet relief. Up front, Grace stopped near the galley curtain. Mr. Cole, she said, there was an incident during boarding involving a protected passenger. It has to be documented. Protected, he repeated, puzzled. What does that even mean? Grace didn't answer directly. Your behavior will be included in the report. You may be contacted by customer relations after landing. Dennis's color drained. You're making this bigger than it is. Amid his sputtering disbelief, Grace lifted a single hand. Sir, please return to your seat. And remain courteous for the rest of the flight. He swallowed hard, suddenly unsure of his footing. As he turned back toward row 22, he stole a look at Evelyn, who sat with a serene composure he could not understand. Something in his chest tightened. Who was she? When he reached his seat, he eased down without a word. Marcus glanced at Evelyn. You all right? Evelyn nodded gently. Yes, dear. Thank you. But Rachel leaned in, whispering, Ms. Harper, I know something more is going on. The crew's treating you differently. Evelyn folded her hands, eyes warm but guarded. Some things are better revealed in their own time. A soft shift of light moved across her silver wing pin again, clearer now, more intentional. And Dennis, now fully aware that the story had changed, sat rigidly in his seat, dread blooming beneath his ribs. He had crossed the wrong person. And the truth of who she was about to land with the weight of the sky itself. The aircraft drifted smoothly through a band of pale clouds, sunlight sweeping across the cabin in soft waves. Most passengers had settled into quiet routines, reading, sipping water, scrolling offline screens, but the stillness carried an undercurrent of anticipation. Something was about to happen, though only a handful of people sensed it. Evelyn Harper sat poised in 22C, hands folded, gaze steady. She felt the subtle shift in the crew's behavior, the respectful distance they kept, the glances they exchanged. The truth was inching closer, and she wondered, not for the first time, why moments of dignity often had to arrive in the shadow of someone else's unkindness. Grace returned to the aisle, shoulders squared with new purpose. She had locked the crew tablet after reading the special profile, but its meaning stayed with her, echoing through every practice step she took. Founder's line. Legacy clearance. Discretion required. The kind of passenger who wasn't on any public VIP list because her influence predated them all. Grace paused near row 22, her voice low. Ms. Harper, would you be comfortable if I asked a quick question? Evelyn smiled gently. Of course. Grace hesitated, rare for her. Is there anything you'd like me to document from earlier? About Mr. Cole's behavior? You don't need to decide now. Evelyn considered her. I'm not seeking revenge, dear. Only respect. Grace nodded, though she wasn't convinced Evelyn grasped how serious the situation could become once corporate reviewed the report. Rachel, sitting across the aisle, blinked. You're documenting him. Like, officially. Grace didn't answer, but the silence was telling. Dennis shifted in his seat again, his pulse thudding. He had heard enough to realize the rules of the flight had changed, and that he was no longer the loudest force in the room. He cleared his throat and leaned forward. Look, I didn't mean anything earlier. I was just frustrated. We were all tired. Marcus looked at him flatly. You kicked her bag. Dennis swallowed. I nudged it. Accidentally. Evelyn turned her head, not accusatory, simply present. Sir, I'm not asking anything from you. But her calmness made Dennis shrink more than anger would have. Grace took a breath, then reached gently for Evelyn's armrest. Ms. Harper, would you mind stepping forward with me for a moment? Just to clarify a few details privately. Evelyn nodded. Of course, dear. As she rose, the silver wing pin glinted boldly, its design clearer now, more distinct than the gift shop versions. Rachel's eyes widened. Marcus straightened. Even Dennis stared. Grace guided Evelyn toward the front galley. The curtain whispered shut behind them. Inside that small, bright space, Grace lowered her voice. Ma'am, I know who you are. At least, I suspect. Evelyn held her gaze without surprise. Grace continued softly. Your profile indicated Founder's Line. Most people don't know that program even exists. But in training, there was a photograph. A woman with a pin like yours. Evelyn's lips curved gently. My mother. Grace's breath hitched. So you're one of the remaining owners, Evelyn said quietly. Silent by design. I prefer not to make a spectacle. I board like everyone else. The truth settled like a soft weight. Grace stared for a moment, touched by awe and a ripple of protectiveness. Ma'am, I'm so sorry for what happened during boarding. He shouldn't have spoken to you that way. Evelyn reached out, lightly touching Grace's hand, an act filled with warmth rather than authority. People forget kindness when they're anxious. I've seen it all my life. Grace exhaled slowly. Corporate asked us to ensure your comfort. If you want him reassigned after landing or removed before we continue, I can call the captain. Evelyn shook her head gently. No removals. But I'd appreciate one thing. Grace leaned closer. Anything. I want him to understand. Not be punished blindly. Just understand what disrespect costs. Grace nodded. That's completely within your rights. They stepped back into the aisle. Passengers looked up, Marcus, Rachel, even the quiet older man in 21A. And Dennis. Especially Dennis. Evelyn moved toward her seat with a serene composure that invited no interruption. Not anger, not pride, simply presence. When she reached row 22, she paused deliberately, turning to face Dennis. The cabin hushed. Mr. Cole, she said softly, I'm not here to shame you. I only ask that you think about the way you speak to people. You never know who they are or what they've carried through life. Dennis opened his mouth, then closed it, utterly lost for words. Grace stepped beside Evelyn, her posture respectful, protective, and unmistakably deferential. And in that instant, the entire cabin understood. The woman in coach, the one he mocked, held more quiet authority than anyone on the aircraft. And the full truth of it was still unfolding. The plane drifted through a smooth current of air, sunlight shifting in soft lattices across the cabin. But every pair of eyes in row 20 and beyond kept returning, deliberately or furtively, to the woman in 22C. Evelyn Harper sat with a gentle posture, hands folded, gaze steady. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded authority. And yet authority, true authority, had settled around her like quiet weather. Dennis Cole stared forward, knuckles white against the armrests. His breathing was uneven, his sense of control slipping through his fingers. People were watching him differently now. Not as the assertive traveler hurrying the line, but as a man who had pushed too hard against someone he didn't understand. Grace returned to row 22 with a different walk than before, one measured with respect. Her voice carried carefully, audible only to the nearby seats. Ms. Harper, the captain is aware of the situation. He asked if you'd like a brief word in the forward galley. Evelyn smiled, calm. Tell him I'm comfortable here, dear. Grace nodded, though the captain's request had been rare, a gesture reserved for corporate board members or visiting executives. The other passengers noticed. They couldn't hear the exact words, but they saw the tone, the shift, the deference. Marcus glanced between Evelyn and Grace. Ma'am, is there something more we should know? Evelyn breathed thoughtfully. Only that I've been involved with this airline my whole life. Quietly, from behind the scenes, Rachel's eyes widened. You mean you work for them? Evelyn's answer was gentle and far larger than the question. I help guide it. That line hit the cabin like a dull, reverberating bell. Subtle, but undeniable. Rachel's jaw dropped slightly. Guide it like. Before she could finish, Grace addressed the nearby rows quietly, professionally. For privacy, we'll avoid details. But Ms. Harper holds legacy authority with the company. She's permitted to travel in any cabin by choice. Choice. The word hung there. A choice to sit and coach. A choice to walk the same narrow aisle as every other traveler. A choice not to announce herself. A choice not to retaliate when someone mistreated her. Marcus leaned back slowly, murmuring, well, that explains a lot. Dennis swallowed, throat tight. Look, I didn't know. I had no way of knowing. Evelyn turned her head, her eyes warm but direct. I don't expect people to treat me kindly because of who I am. I hope they treat me kindly because of who they are. That landed more deeply than the reveal of her status. For the first time since boarding, Dennis didn't have a retort. His gaze dropped to his hands. I was out of line. I shouldn't have said what I did. Or touched her bag. Grace kept her expression neutral, but internally she acknowledged the rare moment unfolding, a genuine shift rather than forced compliance. The captain's voice suddenly came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting beverage service shortly. And we'd like to extend a special welcome to one of our founders' line passengers traveling with us today. Every head turned toward row 22. Founders. Line. There's no hiding it now. Gasps and murmurs fluttered through the cabin. People sat taller, some embarrassed they hadn't noticed her sooner, others proud to have witnessed a rare moment. Dennis felt his entire body heat with humiliation. His voice quivered when he finally forced out the words. Ms. Harper. I am truly sorry. Evelyn regarded him with a compassion he had not earned but desperately needed. Thank you, Mr. Cole. But then she added gently, just remember, kindness is never wasted, even when you think no one is watching. Her wingpin gleamed as she shifted slightly, the engraved pattern now unmistakably different from commercial replicas. It wasn't sold in stores. It wasn't decorative. It was inherited. A symbol of ownership. A signature object carried from the earliest days of the airline. A private mark of influence and responsibility. Grace straightened beside her seat. Ms. Harper, the galley team has prepared something special for you with the captain's permission. Evelyn chuckled softly. Dear, I'm fine with tea. Of course, Grace said. But it comes with a message from the captain. It's an honor to have you on board. A ripple of quiet warmth filled the cabin. Dennis stared at the seat back in front of him, wrestling with the weight of his earlier cruelty. And the rest of the passengers sat with a new understanding. They were flying not just with a woman, but with the very heart of the airline itself. The power flip was complete. But the consequences were only beginning. The cabin felt different now, not louder, not chaotic, but steadier, as if everyone on board had quietly agreed to sit up a little straighter. The revelation about Evelyn Harper didn't turn the flight into a spectacle. Instead, it softened the space, smoothing rough edges that had been sharp an hour earlier. Grace moved through the aisle with renewed purpose. Her professionalism hadn't changed, but the tone of her interactions had. She checked on passengers calmly, kindly, as if reminded of why she joined the airline in the first place, service with dignity, no matter who sat where. She approached Evelyn's row with a small tray. Ms. Harper, your tea. Evelyn accepted it with a smile. Thank you, Grace. The bag's paper tag rustled in the gentle cabin airflow. The soft steam curled upward, brushing Evelyn's face in a warm cloud. From the aisle seat behind her, Harold in 21A leaned forward slightly. Ma'am, I hope you don't mind my saying so. It's refreshing to see calm leadership. People forget what that looks like. Evelyn offered a humble nod. Leadership often works best when no one notices it. Harold smiled, then settled back into his seat. Rachel in 22D scribbled at the corner of her crossword, stealing glances at Evelyn. Finally, she leaned in quietly. Ms. Harper, I want to thank you. Not for who you are, for how you acted. Anyone else might have embarrassed him publicly. Evelyn's eyes softened. Public shame rarely teaches the right lesson. Rachel nodded, thoughtful. Across the aisle, Marcus adjusted his toddler's blanket. He spoke quietly, too, not wanting to intrude. I hope I carry myself like you when I'm older. You handled all that with grace, your own kind, I mean. Evelyn smiled. You already do. You care for your little one, even when the cabin was tense. That matters. Marcus looked down at his child, touched. But Dennis sat rigid and pale, hands clasped together on his knees. He hadn't spoken since he apologized. His chest rose with slow, uneven breaths. The shame clung to him, thick, inescapable. And in that silence, he realized the weight of what he'd done. Not because she was influential, but because he'd forgotten something simple. Every person on a plane carries a story. He swallowed hard and stood, stepping carefully into the aisle. He approached Grace near the front, waiting until she finished handing water to a woman in row 10. Miss Miller, is it? He whispered. Grace turned, her expression neutral. Yes, sir. He cleared his throat, voice trembling. I'd like to file something. The statement. I want the report to show that I was wrong, and that Ms. Harper did nothing to provoke me. Grace studied him for a long moment. This wasn't bravado. It wasn't fear. It was regret finding its footing. I can add your statement, yes, she said. Are you sure you want to? He nodded. Yes. I don't want to be remembered as the guy who bullied someone who didn't deserve it. I shouldn't have spoken the way I did to anyone. Grace tilted her head, something warm softening in her expression. I appreciate that, Mr. Cole. He exhaled shakily, just to make sure she's not hurt by it. Please. I'll make a note, Grace said. He nodded once and returned to his seat slowly, lighter somehow, though the weight wasn't gone. A few rows back, an older couple smiled toward Evelyn. Not in awe, but in admiration. Evelyn sipped her tea, calm as drifting clouds. After a short while, the captain stepped out of the cockpit with permission for a brief cabin check. He approached Evelyn respectfully. Ms. Harper, he said quietly, hand on the headrest in front of her. It's good to have you aboard. If you need anything for the remainder of the flight, let us know. Evelyn nodded gently. Thank you, Captain. The crew has been wonderful. He smiled, touched by her sincerity. We'll be landing on schedule. I hope the rest of your journey is peaceful. When he returned to the cockpit, a quiet satisfaction passed through the nearby passengers, like a small victory for humanity, not hierarchy. Grace resumed service, but she paused beside Evelyn just long enough to whisper, Thank you for setting the tone you did. Evelyn reached for her tea once more. People rise to dignity when given the chance. Below them, the clouds parted in long white ribbons. The aircraft moved forward, steady and sure, carrying a cabin full of strangers who had witnessed something small but meaningful. Accountability that didn't humiliate and power that didn't boast. Fallout had arrived, quiet, balanced, human. But the personal closure was still ahead. The clouds stretched out beneath the aircraft like soft fields of light, layered in quiet blues and gleaming whites. The cabin, calmer than it had been all morning, moved into a gentle rhythm, snack wrappers opening softly, pages turning, the occasional murmured conversation. The atmosphere wasn't just peaceful. It felt restored. Evelyn Harper closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engine settle around her. The tension she carried through the jet bridge had long since loosened, replaced by something steadier. Not pride, not vindication, just a calm sense that the world, at least in this little cabin, had righted itself. Grace approached once more, her steps softer than before. She paused at Evelyn's row, checking the toddler's blanket in 22B, then leaning slightly toward Evelyn. Ms. Harper, she said quietly, corporate sent a note through the system. They know what happened. They wanted to confirm that you're comfortable and to express appreciation for the way you handled everything. Evelyn smiled gently. I'm comfortable, Grace. You and the crew have shown kindness. That's what matters. Grace breathed out, almost visibly relieved. Well, thank you. She moved on to assist another row, leaving Evelyn with a warmth she hadn't expected from a day that began in small friction. Across the aisle, Rachel lifted her notebook. Ms. Harper, do you mind if I ask a question? Not at all. Why, Coach? I mean, if you have the ability to travel differently. Evelyn looked out the window for a moment, watching the sunlight ripple across the wing. Because, Coach, is where most people fly. It reminds me who I serve. Rachel blinked, the words settling deeply. She scribbled something down, perhaps for a class paper, perhaps for her heart. Marcus leaned forward next. Ma'am, I hope I'm not intruding, but thanks for showing my son what calm looks like. Even if he won't remember today. Evelyn chuckled softly. Children absorb grace, even when they don't recall the details. You're a good father, Marcus. His eyes softened. A few rows behind, Harold looked toward her and raised a respectful hand. Evelyn nodded back, quiet exchange of mutual understanding. Even the older couple in row 24 offered a soft smile, one of those stranger-to-stranger moments that meant we saw what happened, and we're better for seeing it. At last, Dennis shifted in his seat. He had been quiet for a long stretch, wrestling with his own reflection. After what seemed like a long internal debate, he cleared his throat. Ms. Harper, he said, barely above a whisper. Evelyn turned, her expression patient and open. He paused, trying again. I gave a statement to the crew. The real version. Not the one that saves my pride. Evelyn nodded gently. That's good, Mr. Cole. He swallowed hard. I want you to know it won't happen again. To anyone. She studied him for a moment, not to judge, but to understand. Then today wasn't wasted. His breath hitched with relief. He sank back, lighter though still humbled. The captain's voice broke gently through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Chicago. Weather is clear, and we'll be landing on schedule. The passengers stirred with renewed energy, the shift from in-flight reflection to landing anticipation. Grace made one final pass through the aisle, checking seatbacks and trays. When she reached Evelyn, she stopped, her voice soft. Thank you again for everything you brought to this flight. Evelyn reached up, touching her silver wing pin, a gesture small but symbolic. The pin caught the cabin light for a moment, bright as a memory. I only did what any person should, she said. Grace smiled. If only everyone did. As the plane dipped through a patch of bright sky, Evelyn looked around the cabin, the people she'd shared this journey with, the small connections formed in the space of a few hours. Dennis, humble but trying. Rachel, inspired and thoughtful. Marcus, devoted and gentle. Grace, steady and compassionate. The captain, respectful. The strangers who had witnessed a quiet rebalancing of dignity. Evelyn rested her hand on her bag, feeling the folded paper she always carried, private notes, names, reminders. A record of days when dignity mattered. This flight would join that list, not because she wielded hidden authority, but because a moment of discourtesy had become a moment of understanding. The wheels extended. The cabin tilted into descent. The city of Chicago glimmered faintly beneath the thinning clouds. Evelyn Harper breathed in deeply, peaceful and ready for the next chapter, whatever form it took. Winter sunlight drifted through the tall concourse windows at O'Hare, pale and calm against the polished floors. Travelers walked with scarves tucked against their collars, rolling suitcases clicking softly over tile. A gentle snowfall dusted the runway outside, enough to shimmer, not enough to delay flights. Evelyn Harper sat alone at a quiet gate, a cup of tea warming her hands. She liked arriving early, letting the stillness settle before the day unfolded. She wore the same silver wing pin, today tucked subtly beneath her cardigan, visible only when she turned a certain way and the light brushed it. 4 months had passed since the flight from Dallas. 4 months of subtle but meaningful changes within the airline she helped guide from behind the scenes. Thanks to Grace's detailed report and Dennis's honest supplemental statement, corporate had reevaluated its passenger dignity protocols. Not loudly, not in a press release. Quiet reforms, updated crew training modules, a new compassionate conduct policy, a discreet reminder to supervisors about modeling patience before pressure. The airline didn't name Evelyn. It never would. But the story of an overlooked passenger treated unfairly, who showed remarkable calm, became a case study in in-house seminars across several airports. And people responded. Not with obligation, but with something warmer. Evelyn sipped her tea and watched the snow swirl in gentle arcs. A familiar voice approached from behind. Ms. Harper. She turned. Grace Miller stood there, bundled in a navy winter coat over her uniform. Same poised expression, same steady kindness. Evelyn's face lit softly. Grace, dear. It's good to see you. Grace smiled. I saw your name on the standby list for Flight 881 and hoped it was really you. Are you traveling today? Yes, Evelyn said. A short visit with an old friend. Grace sat beside her. I'm glad I caught you. We still talk about that day. Quietly, of course. But it changed our team. Evelyn folded her hands. The crew handled it with care. That mattered more than anything. Grace nodded. And something else happened afterward. Do you remember Dennis Cole? Evelyn raised an eyebrow gently. Of course. Grace's smile deepened with a hint of pride. He sent a letter to our station. A handwritten one. He thanked the crew for giving him a chance to correct himself instead of, well, letting him spiral. He said that flight made him rethink how he talks to people under stress. Evelyn felt a warm ache in her chest, the quiet, satisfying kind. People grow when given room. Some do, Grace said, because someone shows them how. A boarding announcement echoed softly overhead. Passengers rose, forming a gentle line. Grace glanced at Evelyn's carry-on. May I walk you to the gate? Evelyn smiled. Only if you promise not to fuss over me. No fuss, Grace said. Just company. They approached the boarding lane. The gate agent looked up, then did a double take at Grace before giving Evelyn a warm, respectful nod. Without ceremony, without announcement, she gestured Evelyn through the priority lane, even though the boarding group hadn't opened yet. Evelyn inclined her head graciously. She never needed special treatment. But today, she accepted the gesture for what it was, respect freely given, not demanded. As they paused near the jet bridge entrance, Grace reached out gently. Ms. Harper, I wanted to say this properly. Before that day, I knew my job mattered. But after meeting you, I understood why it matters. You reminded me that every passenger carries something, history, heartache, responsibility, and we never know which interaction becomes a turning point. Evelyn touched Grace's hand, eyes warm. And you reminded me what good service looks like. People like you keep this airline flying. Grace blinked, touched. Thank you. A final boarding call chimed. Evelyn lifted her bag, ready to enter the jet bridge. As she stepped forward, the light caught her silver wing pin, just for a moment, casting a small gleam on the wall. Grace noticed. The pin. The legacy. The quiet authority carried with humility. Safe travels, Ms. Harper, Grace said. Evelyn smiled softly. Safe skies, Grace. She walked down the jet bridge with unhurried steps, blending into the steady flow of passengers. To anyone else, she looked like just another older woman traveling on a winter afternoon. But for those who knew, for those who had seen, she remained something more. A reminder that dignity, given freely, can change the direction of a day or a life. Andy, thanks for watching.